Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bold Explorer reading of Narrow Boat by LTC Rolt in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. I thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to be reading chapter 22. I'm not quite sure how far we'll get. I haven't pre-read the chapters, so I've been out filming. So it's thrown me doing this at 2 o'clock. So this is the first time we've done this. I've been out filming, and I've also been trying to edit tomorrow's video, and I haven't quite finished the edit. So once I finish this, I shall finish that edit, and then I shall light the essay and sort out my dinner, and then I shall do the Vogue show. So it's a very busy day. But hello to the lovely Julia. Hello to you. Mike Stevens, hello to you. Ed Ovet, 9 a.m. Good morning from South Florida. 9 in the morning. There we go. Oh, if only we had the morning all over again. Wouldn't that be lovely? Afternoon, Adrian. Lovely to see you. Good afternoon. Not been my day today. Oh dear. Was verbally abused by a woman runner after she ran out on me. Think this lockdown is getting to some people. I'm sorry to hear that, Adrian. What a swine. Yeah, it can happen, can't it? And then we had it yesterday with Julia and I were discussing after the show some idiot who'd left it was just an obscene commenter on Facebook regarding the video over Stenning Way that I did. And we just get all these people who are either keyboard warriors or just, upset with things. Linda Kane, good afternoon. That sounds strange. Oh, what sounds strange? Trouble is, it's 40 seconds after I said something, so it's probably, if I was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, there wouldn't be a reel on this side. The tape just goes through and would be just dropping onto the floor like that, so I can't go back and listen to it. This could be a daily habit. Well, it could, couldn't it? We could get this going. Rita Loy, good morning. Hello, Rita. Thank you for joining me. It must be up nice and early at 6 in the morning for where you are. Mike Stevens says, the wrong doer often plays the victim. Yes, that's true. Everyone's playing victims in the last few days, as if being a victim is a great thing to be. I don't understand this victim thing. Who wants to, be a victim? A victim is somebody who's hard put on and is supposedly deserved of sympathy, but you have to be a genuine victim, not a fake victim. And to top it off, I ran over a poo. I'm not laughing. At least you didn't fall in a canal. At least you didn't do that. Yes, 6 a.m, says Rita. Turbo Steam, yes, Mike, I rode off and ignored her. She ranted away in a loud voice. Yes, well, quite right. Shall I make you feel better? I'll make you feel better. I wasn't going to say this because I didn't know how people would take this, but I'll make you feel better. I went out for a cycle ride yesterday, and I was doing a sort of a loop, and I'd gone down to close to Shoreham, and I was coming back from Shoreham Way along the seafront, and passing the lovely Julia's house, actually. And then as you come into Lancing, there's a roundabout on the seafront. And before that, if you come slightly back, there is one of these little islands in the road with bollards. And I was cycling up close to the curb on the road, as normal. And a car, and it was an Audi, came up behind me and decided to overtake in between me and the bollard. This bollard, this little island that had two bollards. You know the sort I mean? They're about, 10 foot long, something like that. Two bollards. I think the idea is to try and slow the traffic down, or to help pedestrians cross into the centre and then across the other lane. So it was single way that way, single way this way, little island, two bollards, and I'm cycling along and I'm just going through this channel between the bollard and the thing, and this car decides to overtake me at that point rather than wait until I get through, and then they've got the whole two lanes effectively if nobody's coming, but plenty of time to get past me. But this person decided wasn't going to wait, so they went through like this. Well, they missed me, but they misjudged it, because they hit the curb on the island where the bollards are, and I heard this almighty bang, and as they went past, this... they'd smashed their wheel and burst their tyre, passing me, and then they quickly turned into a car park, which was on the other side. And I saw them go. And now, because it was an Audi, I thought, it's going to be by some sporty, oiks in there. And they parked up, the driver parked up, and I saw them get out, and I could see the tyre was flat. And I was cycling like this thinking, they're going to be annoyed now because they tried to pass me, hit the curb, burst their tyre. And I thought, they're going to blooming well start shouting at me as if it was my fault because I'm just cycling near to the inside curb. Anyway, it turns out that it was a woman in her, I suppose, mid-60s, something like that, a woman with white hair in her flash sporty car. And I was going to sort of stop at first, but then I thought, well, what can I do? She tried to overtake me. I'll only get a load of abuse. And she's no doubt, if she's got an Audi, she will have an AA cover, or she can phone her husband or whatever it was. She didn't look terribly shocked. She just looked annoyed. But she didn't actually look up at me as I cycled past and looked in. So hopefully that made you laugh. I did have a bit of a pain of conscience but for not stopping. It wasn't clear. It wasn't my fault at all. But she should have waited. She should have just waited till I cleared this obstacle, and then she could have passed. It was a bit bizarre, but it was on my mind for a while. Should I have stopped and said, "Are you okay? Do you want me to call the AA or something?" And I just thought, well, it's not really my place to do that. Anyway, there you go. You made me laugh, Richard. Be my guest. Just one of them days. Yes, sorry about that. That's what I call karma. Karma, chameleon. Right, we will commence. If not an Audi, it would have been a BMW. Yeah, it was just somebody who just didn't have the patience. It's only about, as I say, 10, 12 feet, this thing. And I was almost through it, but they thought, no, they'll just get past me. This is chapter 22, Industrial Landscape, it's called. And you remember, they are old Lionel and his wife, whose name, I can't remember what she's called, Jackie or something. He doesn't give her, many times mentions her name. But anyway, whatever her name is, Janice, is it? Something like that. Because the canal was the nucleus around which the potteries developed. Oh, hello. We formed a better general impression of the district from the water than was possible in the confining maze of narrow cobbled streets. Planning to cross the border of Cheshire before nightfall, we made an early start from Trentham Park Lock and were soon passing the collieries of the Stafford Coal and Iron Company, monstrous black slag heaps, droning fans and gaunt pit-head gears, whose spinning wheels whirled in shrouds of drifting steam from the winding houses. The approach to Stoke presented a scene of utter desolation and ruin. On the one hand, a dismal, waterlogged waste caused by the subsidence of old worked-out coal seams. On the other district, blast furnaces, cold and red and rust reddened. Beyond these we passed two ruined locomotive works, whose silent shops, with their shattered windows, constituted a mute but eloquent warning to those who entrust their livelihood to the shifting and fickle fortunes of mechanicalized industry. After this sombre scene, a low comic relief provided by a warehouse full of chamber pots was very welcome. I had supposed that this homely utensil, like the hip bath and the mahogany commode, was a Victorian relic fast becoming obsolete. But if the smoking ovens of this pottery were any criterion, their manufacture still constitutes a profitable branch of the industry. Mooring by Stoke Wharf, we walked into the city to buy supplies. This was not easy, for in a district where so many housewives work the day through in the decorating rooms, the modern method of cooking with a can opener is so popular that butchers and greengrocers were few and far between, the streets being lined by the shop fronts of cheap chain grocers, stacked with canned foods. One shop, however, was strange to our eyes, that of the bird fancier, his window filled with packets of bird seeds and medicines of every sort, while through a doorway festooned with gaily coloured cages floated the rich fluttering of roller canaries and thin gossiping chatter of budgerigars. Just as the potter's favourite hobbies of pigeon and whippet racing are a legacy from his bull-baiting and cockfighting ancestors, so perhaps his love of birds may be derived from forgotten associations of ever earlier origin. Situated among the broken southern foothalls of the Peak District of Derbyshire, the potteries present some unique industrial landscapes. As we climbed the 4 locks out of Stoke, the grimy slate roofs of cottages and factories rose tier upon tier towards the black tower of Shelton Church, while mean streets covered with a geometrical pattern the opposite heights of Harts Hill and Baysford. These were indistinct in the haze of steam and smoke which rose from the valley bottom like steam from a cauldron. But the dominant, inescapable feature of the scene were the pottery ovens. Rows of them met the eye on every side, shaped like gigantic bottles, blackened and squat. Those that were belching dense coils of smoke from their necks looked as actively satanic as a volcano, but those that stood cold and dead had an appearance that was strangely ancient and oriental. They might well have been the pagodas of some temple to strange gods, or monuments that marked the burial places of kings who held court when the saber-toothed tiger ranged the forests of Europe. At dusk, when the waning light softens its stark outlines and the sunset sky flaunts sable banners of drifting smoke, or at night when the street lamps star the hills with points of light and the flare from open furnace doors flicks skyward, it's impossible to deny this rolling forest of bricks and mortar a certain sombre grandeur. The men of North Staffordshire are proud of their smoky sky, for to them it is the symbol of prosperity, and local stationers display picture postcards of typical smokescapes for the benefit of rare visitors. Though trade was said to be slack, there appeared, to our eyes, fresh from the country, to be enough smoke in the air to please the most pessimistic potter as we approached Etura Summit Lock and the junction of the canal to Leek and Frog Hall, yet another branch of the Grand Trunk. Just beyond the lock head, we passed Josiah Wedgwood's famous pottery and presently found ourselves in the heart of the Shelton Steelworks, scene of H.G. Wells' macabre short story, The Cone. Cressy's white windows, that for so long had seen unfold before them a slow-moving pattern of field, hedgerow and tree, now looked directly into the clangorous rolling mill, lofty as the nave of a cathedral, where white-hot billets of steel were being flattened as easily as pastry under a rolling pin, or grappled by the electric cranes which rumbled high overhead. Workmen, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, looked up from their task of feeding the rolls to grin and nod, while at one point, where the crane track projected over the canal, a crane driver leaned from his cabin directly above our deck to call to us, "What about a trip?" A damp white mist shot through by the sunlight with miniature rainbows momentarily enveloped us as we passed the cooling towers, and beyond these the coke ovens were belching steam and flame alternately. Opposite them, towering above us, reared the fiery heart of this monstrous organisation, the blast furnaces. Lifts were creeping up and down their pitiless steel sides, feeding them with fuel. And as we passed, one of the cones that close their throats was lowered to admit a charge, the air above shimmering in the sudden blast of intense heat which shot skywards. A sharp turn under the bridge, and the canyon of slag, as barren and desolate as the mountains of the moon, hid this modern Gehenna from our sight. Not a blade of grass finds foothold on these wastes, and the smoke of internal fires filter through fissures like lava-like crust. Occasionally, owing to this internal burning, a large area will cave in, subjecting the unfortunate inhabitants of nearby streets to a shower of fine ash and grit. These mountainous tips are also the scene of the steelwork's most spectacular display. Just as we emerged from their shadow onto the long embankment, we saw a locomotive panting up to the summit, pushing before it a ladle of slag, and appearing from our advantage below to be no bigger than a fly. Minute figures appeared, coupling the chain which operated the tipping machine to the front draw-hook of the engine. Then the latter ran backwards, and the ladle discharged its contents down the precipitous slope. On its journey from the furnace, the slag had cooled enough to form a hard outer crust, so that for some yards it bounded along like a great boulder until, striking an obstacle, it burst with a flash of light that was blinding even in the bright sunshine, and its molten heart coursed downwards like some infernal mountain torrent, a livid vein set with flickering tongues of flame. What an amazing description that is. As we approached the forest of pottery ovens that was Burslem, it was difficult to believe that we were still travelling over the same canal which had been slumbered beneath the trees at Great Haywood, for it had become a busy highway thronged with boats. There was chocolate-brown Coburn and Coper motorboats from Manchester, all named after wild birds, and carrying cargoes of chemicals in tanks, or carboys of the Mersey Weaver and Anderton companies, laden with coal, clay, or stone, and even the occasional number one. Their external finish did not compare with that of the Oxford canal boats, but through their open cabin doorways we caught the gleam of polished brass knobs and rails, while many of their crew were dressed in the true tradition, captains in corduroys, broad-belted, their wives wearing the graceful full-skirted dresses, tight-waisted and most elaborately pleated. Beyond Burslem, we paused by a busy boatyard where we heard the familiar sounds of caulking mallets, while at Longport Wharf many boats were unloading their dazzling white cargoes of china clay. At Chatterley, by Tunstall, the seemingly interminable vista of ovens and chimneys began to thin out, the valley to close in upon us, and soon we sighted the portals of the 2 tunnels under Harecastle Hill. We had reached the headwaters of the Trent and the northern boundary of the Potteries. And that was chapter 22. We're on 23, but we'll have a quick pause and have a catch up with the with the comments. Joseph Watson, first time I've caught you live. You're very welcome, Joseph. Nice to see you. Natural justice to the Audi driver. Oh, yes, that's right. There we go. Linda Kane, we haven't got Ramiboo's quick fingers today. No, she's probably having a good old snooze, I should think. Turbo Stream says it would be good to go to some of the places in these books to see what's left of them. I absolutely, totally agree. It's like with the English journey. I'd love to just follow in his footsteps, Priestley, and same with this, to do that journey. And Julia and I are going on a canal boat trip in October, and we will be on the Oxford Canal where he starts, although we'll be further up, so we'd be probably going south, so we won't, but it would be lovely to do the trip with that in mind. Hello to the new commentators, Bob Miner 42 and Joseph Watson. Thank you very much for coming along. Lovely to see you. Mike's Mr. Rolt's writing is so descriptive. It makes me really feel that one is there with him. I just wish I could write like that. It's so beautiful. Some of those descriptions are amazing. Ed Loud, hello, bit late. Nice to see you. Cooking dinner for my neighbour. Ah, bless you. Well done for you. Jada Jones, lovely day. What time are you dishing up? Yeah, we'll all get up to Greenwich for lunch, for dinner tonight. Apparently, about 50 in Stoke, preserved and listed, said Linda Kane. It's amazing because this is only, this is 39, so this is 80 years ago. And, you know, now they're all museum pieces, I suppose. Turbo Stream says, I have an idea of smoking bottle kilns in Stoke with crispy bacon sarnie on a canal boat now. That sounds great. Anyway, isn't this book lovely? I'll have to see if I can get a copy. Really enjoying the reading. Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure. Bacon, yummy. I haven't had bacon for ages. I must buy some bacon. Arnold Bennett, says Mike Stevens, who wrote much about the Potteries, has his ashes in Burnslam Cemetery. Does he indeed? Yes, because Arnold Bennett, Priestley was talking about Arnold Bennett, didn't he? Because he said that he was from that area, if I remember. Turbo says, I'm calm now after that chapter. Marvellous. This trip needs to be on a narrowboat canal. Yes, well, we definitely we'll be on the canal, but to go around the Potteries, I think to follow in their footsteps, that's perhaps next year, if I can persuade the lovely Julia to, because she is the steers woman. She does this business. So she's brilliant at that. So I need to persuade her to come for 2 or 3 weeks on a canal. I don't know whether she'd cope with me for that long, but and Joseph, of course. Joseph will be running around. So maybe next year we'll do our one in, but it would be great to just follow the whole route, wouldn't it? I don't know how long it would take. Anyway, this is called Hare Castle Tunnels. Let's have a look, see how long this chapter is, just to give me a vague idea. Oh, not too long. Not too long. Let's crack on with this. 23 watching, started 22 minutes ago, chapter 22. Dan Ludlow, hello. Yes, if you want to catch up on any of them, they are all on the YouTube channel under the live tab. I think that's how to find them. Right, thank you for tuning in anyway. This is chapter 23, Hare Castle Tunnels. The greatest obstacle in the path of James Brindley's canal was the ridge of high ground, a continuation of the Pennine chain which divides the valley of the Upper Trent from the Great Plain of Cheshire and extends as far south as the Wrekin in Shropshire. Hare Castle Hill being the narrowest point of this ridge, it was here that the engineer decided to drive a tunnel 2,880 yards long. No work of such magnitude had ever been contemplated in the 18th century England, and the project appeared so fantastic that it was referred to by local sceptics as Brindley's Air Castle. Nevertheless, as soon as the Act authorising the construction of the canal had been passed, Brindley set to work upon his impossible task. He first sank vertical shafts at various points along the hilltop down to canal level, the spoil being drawn up by horse gins while the workings were kept free from water by windmills. As the work progressed, however, water was encountered in such quantities that the wind pumps were no longer adequate, but Brindley was not daunted, having actually counted on the presence of such springs for the necessary water supply to supply the summit level. He therefore erected a beam pumping engine, or fire engine as it was then called, which, working night and day, effectually kept the waters under control. Meanwhile, the attitude of the local inhabitants changed swiftly from ridicule to awe. In 1767, a resident from Burslem wrote to a distant friend, Gentlemen, come to view our eighth wonder of the world, the subterraneous navigation that is being cut by the great Mr. Brindley, who handles rocks as easily as plum pies and makes the four elements subservient to his will. The great engineer never lived to see the work completed, for he died in September 1772 as a result of a chill contracted during his survey of the Colden branch, and although the rest of the canal works from Mersey to Trent had long been finished, it was not until 1777 that the tunnel was at last opened, after 11 years of unremitting toil by 600 men. Even so, it proved a serious handicap to traffic, for the shaft was extremely small, being only 9 feet wide and 12 feet high, so that boats could not pass each other. Since it took 2 hours to leg through, there being no towing path, the delay and congestion can readily be realised, and it is not surprising to read that fierce arguments, frequently leading to blows, occurred among the boat crews waiting at the tunnel's mouth for the privilege of the next turn through. Blimey, can you imagine that? TurboStream says, I've been up the Wrekin. Yes, I've been up the Wrekin. Linda Kane says, I'll have the book back, Richard, as you've got a copy. Cheeky monkey. Of course you can. Of course you can. I haven't finished with it yet. Did you know, as I read, I tear the pages out. So, I tear them out as I go. Where are we? Oh, yeah. In 1820, you've put me off my balance now, handing back the book. In 1825, the Canal Company decided to remedy this state of affairs and sought the advice of Brindley's successor, Thomas Telford. His solution was to construct a new tunnel parallel with the old. So great being the advance of civil engineering in the intervening years that although of far larger section, it was completed in less than 3 years. For 90 years thereafter, both tunnels continued in use, the old tunnel carrying the southbound traffic and vice versa. But in 1914, an electric tug was installed in the new tunnel, and the old, though it remained theoretically navigable for a few more years, soon fell into disuse. The subsidence of the old workings has since still further reduced the restricted headroom so that it is now quite impassable, the weed-grown entrance little larger than that of a city sewer, being all that the canal traveller can now see of Brindley's eighth wonder. Is that still the case? Does anybody know if the tunnel is still closed or whether anybody can get in there? I didn't realise it was so enjoyable, says Linda Kane. I know. It is well worth rereading it, just for the just for the polish. I'm going to buy some more of Rolt's books because, I've got some of his. I would love to read some fiction if he's written any fiction. The Hare Castle Tunnel tug must be one of the most curious craft ever constructed. Drawing its current from an overhead cable, it has no propeller, but hauls itself along on a second cable laid in the bed of the canal, picking it up on a winch and playing it out astern. Owing to the possibility of their screws fouling this submerged cable, motor, as well as horse-drawn craft, are compelled to make use of this weird contraption so as it was not in sight when we arrived. So, as it was not in sight when we arrived at the tunnel mouth, we moored up and had tea. Before long, a string of horses appeared over the hill, while from the dark depths ahead a distant muttering slowly grew to a prodigious groaning and grinding sound, like that of a decrepit tram-car climbing up a steep hill. At long last, the tug crawled out of the sun into the sunshine, and for a few minutes the tunnel mouth was a scene of great activity, as the string of boats were detached, engines started, and horses reattached to their respective boats. It was then that our turn was to be taken in tow, so we moved ahead till we were beneath the overhead wire. One narrow boat always accompanies the tug, its cabin doing duty as its guard van for the old man who issues the boatmen with tug tickets on receipt of their fares. It was therefore to the stern of this boat that we made fast. Driver and guard then went into deep conference over the height of Cressy's cabin, shaking their heads so dubiously that we began gloomily to visualize the prospect of having to beat an ignominious retreat. Subsidences have affected the headroom of the new tunnel also, and the presence of a towing path which forces boats to hug the side wall does not help matters. Anticipating difficulty, we had already removed the water tank from the roof, placing it, filled, on the foredeck to ballast her, but this, in the opinion of these experts, was not enough. A pile of sandbags round the electric substation saved the situation. When these had been stacked forward and a bulk of timber lashed slantwise from the gunwale to the corner of the cabin top when these had been stacked forward and a bulk of timber lashed slantwise from the gunwale to the fore corner of the cabin top to act as fender, the tug crew declared themselves satisfied. So, as there was still time in hand before we were due to start, we sat talking in the sunshine of the foredeck. Even on the canals they have built the names of Brindley and Even on the canals they have built, the names of Brindley and Telford have been forgotten, so that it was a surprise to find that the tug driver was as well informed as any historian regarding the building of the two tunnels. More interesting still, he recalled Turnhurst, where Brindley spent his last years of his life. He had actually attended the demolition sale, where he had purchased some iron-hard oak timbers from his old mansion, once the seat of the Belliot family, said to have been the last in England to employ that admirable figure the family. I'm so sorry. He had actually attended the demolition sale, where he had purchased some iron-hard oak timbers from this old mansion, once the seat of the Belliot family, said to have been the last in England to employ the admirable figure the family fool, but late of years surrounded and undermined by collieries. He had also traversed the old tunnel in a small boat before it became impassable even to the lightest craft. The guard was eyeing his watch, and we were preparing to set forth when we heard the unmistakable beat of an approaching motor, punctuated by prolonged blasts of a siren, imploring us to wait. "Come along, then," the tug driver admonished, and presently a pair of Fellows Morton boats swung round the turn and made fast to our stern. Then, with a jerk, we were off at last. For all its prodigious noise, the tug travelled even more slowly than a fully laden horseboat, so that the dark journey seemed interminable. Lashed as she was, bow and stern, there was no need to steer Cressy, so we sat among the sandbags and the foredeck, looking into the darkness ahead. Vivid blue sparks spluttered from the overhead conductor of the tug, and in the bar of light which streamed through the aft doors of the guard's cabin, we could watch the uneven roof of dripping brickwork skimming precariously close to our cabin top. At one point the tunnel was intersected by another at right angles, a relic this of a system of subterranean canals which Brindley drove to direct. Sorry, let's get my head round this. At one point the tunnel was intersected by another at right angles, a relic this of a system of subterranean canals which Brindley drove direct to the coal faces of his collieries at Golden Hill, thus not only draining the pits but enabling the coal to be hauled away without having first to be drawn to the surface. These ingenious underground waterways have not been explored within living memory, for the coal seams at canal level have long been exhausted, but the guard could remember in his early youth an old boatman who had worked through them. The boats, which were drawn along by means of staples fixed in the walls, were necessarily very small and finely built, of only 10-ton capacity, in order that they could negotiate the sharp right-angle turns between one tunnel and another. We were nearly 3/4 of an hour below ground before we crept out into the evening sunlight at Harding's Wood, transshipped our ballast, restarted the engine, and bade farewell to the tug crew. We had scarcely lost sight of the tunnel mouth before we passed the junction of the Macclesfield Canal. This waterway branches off to the south, but shortly afterwards crosses over the Trent and Mersey by an aqueduct and heads due north along the edge of the Derbyshire uplands to its junction with the Peak Forest Canal at Marple. A further half-hour's travelling brought us to our day's objective, the Red Bull Inn at Lawton, on the Cheshire border, once a well-known stage on the pack-horse route between the Potteries and the Mersey. It was almost dark by the time we reached the Red Bull Wharf, and astern the lights of the Five Towns made a glare in the sky over Harecastle Hill. And that's that chapter done. Thomas Telford altered Birmingham's mainline canal in my last video from Brindley's original course. We've got your second video in tonight's Vobe show. Although described singularly as a tunnel, Harecastle is actually two separate but parallel tunnels built almost 50 yards apart. Yes, so that's obviously what he described. The first was constructed by James Brindley in the 18th century. The second was by Thomas Telford, which we heard about. Only the Telford Tunnel remains navigable after partial collapse closed the Brindley Tunnel shortly before the First World War. Some amazing engineering. As the Telford Tunnel is only wide enough for a single boat, canal traffic is managed by sending alternative northbound and southbound groups in boats. I wonder how quickly you can get through the tunnel now. Is that the one with the gates at either end? Says TurboStream. If they repaired the Brindley Tunnel, it would enable two-way traffic then. Yes, it's a surprising... I guess who would do that now? The Canal River Trust probably haven't got anything like the money to do that. While boats are within the tunnel, an airtight door is shut, so fresh air is constantly drawn through the tunnel. Wait a minute. While boats are in the tunnel, an airtight door is shut. Shut. You would think that would prevent air coming through, wouldn't it? The fans protect modern boaters from the harmful build-up of diesel fumes. Oh, right. Modern journey times are now about 30 to 40 minutes. Even so, that's quite a long time in a tunnel. Gosh, I would be quite perturbed. Yes, Linda, I think I've seen it on some YouTube videos. I think I've been through the tunnel on Heartcraft. Oh, Julia, have you? Wow. That's that must be quite scary. That must be quite scary. Goodness. That is amazing. We're going to read this next chapter, which is very short, called The Vale Royal. It's just about two full pages, I think. This is chapter 24. Of our day's journey from Red Bull to Middlewich, there is little to be told, except that it involved a great deal of hard labour. The canal descending into the great plain of Cheshire by a seemingly endless succession of 32 locks. Owing to the heavier traffic on this section, these Cheshire locks, as the boatmen call them, are arranged in duplicate, an interconnecting paddle allowing a full lock to discharge into its empty fellow, so that one acts as a side pond to the other. All day long, we slowly worked our way downwards, while the solitary bastion of Mow Cop and the long scarp line of the backbone of England receded into the distance astern. Not only were the locks very heavy to work, but the surroundings depressing in the extreme, a dreary industrial hinterland that was neither town nor country. The poverty-stricken farms and ruined factories of Road Heath, Hassel Green, and Wheellock spoke only too plainly of a rural life transformed by a brief period of industrial expansion, which, having laid waste to the land and claimed its husbandman, had passed on to the factories new. The only redeeming feature of the day was the number of horseboats that we met, more than we'd ever encountered on the whole journey. Among the crews were some of the fine types of the old race of canal folk, one boat captain attracting our attention particularly. With his clear skin, proud equine features and dark eyes, he was the perfect specimen of true Romany stock. His face was fittingly framed by the dark ringlets which curled from beneath his cap, and as he moved about the locks, every movement graceful, his gold earrings flashed in the sunlight. At dusk, the tall chimneys of the Middlewich salt works were a welcome sight ahead, for we knew that they marked the end of the locks and the gateway to the open country. We had had our fill of the industrial Midlands by this time, and could think only of quiet waters and green fields. Our 76-mile journey on the Trent and Mersey Canal came to an end the next morning, when we entered the Shropshire Union Canal at Wardle Lock Junction. Like most of the Shropshire Canal system, the Middlewich branch is one of the more recent waterways constructed by Thomas Telford, and although is now well over a century old, it is habitually referred to by the Trent and Mersey boatmen as the New Cut. Following the edge of a shelf of high ground on the right bank of the River Weaver, its more recent origin was at once manifest in the bold embankments and cuttings by which it crossed the narrow wooded valleys of tributary streams or the intervening ridges obstructions which Brindley would have carried his canal many tortuous miles to avoid. Though we were actually travelling at no great height, the level of the Cheshire Plain was such that our view from the deck commanded a fine sweep of country stretching northwards over the Winsford Flashes to Delamere Forest, and southwest to the Peckforton Hills, and that dominating feature of the Cheshire scene, Beeston Crag. Perched secure upon the eyrie of its precipitous slope, the ruined keep of Beeston still holds a brewing watch upon the plains from the Wrekin to the Bredons, and from Mow Cop to the marches of Wales. Built by Randolph de Blunderville, Earl of Chester, when he returned from the Holy Land in 1220, with the memories of the great fortresses of the first Crusaders still fresh in his mind, the castle's eventual history did not come to an end until after the Civil Wars, during which it was occupied successively by Cavalier and Roundhead. It was at Beeston that the unhappy King Richard II left his treasure, only to lose it when the garrison surrendered at the approach of Henry Bolingbroke. And for centuries, from the castle's upper ward, beacons have flared their message to the yeomen of the Vale Royal, spreading the tidings of the death of kings or the approach of Spain's Armada. I've been up to Beeston. It's some great climbing country around there. As the sun sank towards the shoulder of Peckforton, the subtle alchemy of twilight transformed this broad vale of woodland and pasture into a dim sea that lapped the knees of the far hills. We had reached the point where the bank between the canal and the Weaver was particularly steep, the river meandering in great loops through the levels directly below, its slow-moving surface reflecting the evening sky like a burnished shield. In the middle distance, the stream was spanned by a bridge of several arches, and on the further bank a church tower rose above encircling trees to catch the last rays of the sun, which had already left the roofs of the village which clustered about it. This, we learned from our map, was the village of Church Minshall, and here we made our first prolonged stay since we had left Barrow upon Soar. We could scarcely have chanced upon a better surviving example of the traditional English village. We had purposely scoured the countryside. Here there was no show village of stockbroker Tudor as false as a harlot's smile, and more surprising still, it had escaped the fate of becoming an industrial dormitory of crew, aptly described by one of the villagers as no more a ruck of houses being perilously near. Oh, I see, crews being very near. Happily immune from these evils, and too unassuming to attract the sightseer, Church Minshall shelters securely under Weaver Bank, a self-sufficient rural community that in numbers and activity has changed but little through the centuries. The reason for this survival undoubtedly lies in the comparative prosperity of local agriculture. Never before on our journey had we seen such well-drained pastures, trimmed hedgerows, or prosperous farmsteads. They were a sight to gladden eyes, grown accustomed to leagues of derelict land, fast reverting to wilderness. Yet there was the same conspicuous lack of arable land as elsewhere, the Cheshire farmer's great cow byres representing the mainstay of his livelihood. Possessing the finest dairy pasture in England, he is a milk manufacturer, and as such he has the better been able to withstand conditions which have brought the orthodox mixed farmer, who is the backbone of the healthy agricultural community, to the brink of ruin. Thus it is that conditions in the Vale Royal are not as rosy as they first appear, although prosperity of any sort is preferable to neglect and decay, if the lease of rural life in villages such as Church Minshall is therefore prolonged, or thereby prolonged. He writes so very well, but sometimes it is quite trippingly on the tongue, and he writes in a way that you don't always see the end of the sentence coming, which is why sometimes I do get myself a little tongue-tied. But, you know, one's getting used to his way of writing. So that's the last chapter we're going to read today. Only Telford Tunnel remains navigable. Oh, yes, we read that. TurboStream, one of the gates. Yes, Linda, I have been on some of the vids. Oh, yes, was awesome. The novelty didn't wear off the whole 35-ish minutes traversing it, I bet. Must have been quite spooky as well. Dan Ludlow. Thomas Telford built Folkestone Harbour in 1809. He was the guy that got about and achieved as much that still exists long after he has ceased to be. Yes, it's nice that he has. Whereas Robert Hooke, he built after the Great Fire of London of 1666, along with Christopher Wren. He built and rebuilt a whole load of churches, but I think there is none of Robert Hooke's churches left in London. There are a few Wren ones, and there is some that are credited to Wren that some people think were Hooke's. Hooke's a fascinating bloke. Only mention that, as you say, that, you know, Thomas Telford stuff is still is still extant. Busy Bee, is that the tunnel where you have the riverboat man with you and he rings some when you are halfway through? Oh, that would be interesting. Dan, I think of how different the country would be if the likes of Telford didn't build what they built. Yes, imagine. I mean, at least, you know, when they built stuff, it was beautiful. It was just beautiful as well as engineeringly sound. Joseph Watson, very relaxing listening to you while working from home. Helps me feel less isolated. Good stuff, Joseph. I'm very pleased. Thank you very much. Sorry, sometimes I am better at reading in other days, but we'll try this again tomorrow in the afternoon for sure. We'll see how we go. Oh, I've lost my space. Linda Kane says, of course, Thomas Telford built the Menai Strait, or Menai Strait, the Menai Strait Bridge and the Pont Casolti Aqueduct at Llangollen. Yes, the Pont Casolti I have walked across, and I think Julia has been across in her family's or her in-laws' family's boat, the Hartcraft. Very different, much of it pioneering. Unlike now, engineers learn their trade. There are a few lessons other than mistakes. Also, consider how Telford would travel between all the locations. I mean, yes, obviously they knew no different, but they sort of put up with all sorts of goodness knows what in order to get their stuff done. And they did take a long time, and I suppose hence, you know, they got them right as right as they could. So that's all good. Not used to the new time. Yes, sorry, J.W. Harville. I apologise about that. I'm also trying out this time. It may be that we go back to the mornings, but it does give me a longer in the morning to get out and do a walk without panicking. You're reading it like you don't want it to end, Richard. Is that good or bad? Yeah, I don't want it to end. I love. Oh, there's Guillotine Locks. Where's that? On the Shrewsbury Canal. Oh yeah, Newport, Norbury, Newport, and the Cut End. Oh right, we're getting up to there. That's a part of the canal system I know very well. Yes, I absolutely love his style of writing. He does catch me out in the way he sometimes constructs his quite long sentences, but I absolutely love it. And the descriptions are, I never knew. I've got some of his more drier work where he's talking about, he talks about Thomas Telford. I've got a book of his on Thomas Telford, and I think there's another one I've got, train accidents or something, not as beautifully written. I think this was, a love of work. He was younger and probably hungrier and desperate to show off his skill. And I guess it's like a lot of things. When you're successful, you don't have to try quite as hard because people know who you are. The style of both books you read to us remind me of Dr. Sin by Russell Thorndike in their use of language, not pandering to the political correctness of today and not seeking to offend deliberately. I don't know if anyone's ever listened to or read anything by Will Self. He occasionally does these essays on the radio, on Radio 4. And he's a bloke whose voice I can barely stand because he's very monotonous as he talks. I was going down... And then he uses words that nobody else has ever... The most obscure words you could find. Now, I don't mind being introduced to new words, but he uses them peppers them in 3 or 4 in a paragraph, every paragraph. And it's almost as if he's doing it just to show off his he sits in looking at a dictionary tries to find some archaic words that nobody ever uses. So you don't actually know what he means. Whereas the language in here, you know exactly what he means. You know all the words. We just don't use them as frequently as maybe we should. And he just crafts them so beautifully and so effortlessly. And if it's read nicely or well, it just flows so descriptively. And I think that's the skill of a writer, not showing off that you can find words in a dictionary and know the meaning, because communication is about understanding what somebody's saying, not showing off. Jim Mugford, hello from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hello to you. Love the videos. Keep them up. Thank you very much. Doing my best. Just saw the Telford Tunnel on the Great Canal journeys. Oh, right. Not sure if the Pont Casolti Aqueduct still only has a guard rail on the side opposite to the footpath. Yes, I think that's still the case. Look terrifying if you're the tiller of your boat. I imagine it is. Love that aqueduct, says the lovely Julia. I think I remember the tunnel is manned both ends. 3 boats go through at a time. Ben Reeve, yes, Pont Casolti has only one guardrail for the footpath, sheer drop on the boat side. Yeah, whatever you do. Actually, just thinking about it has given me that feeling in the pit of your stomach, just thinking about that sheer drop. I can't stand the monotonous voice reading anything, says... no, absolutely. Not that keen on Will Self. In fact, not keen at all. No, he's a strange bloke. He is a strange bloke. He does a lot of walking. I admire, there's, like anything, there's good in everybody. And he does a lot of walking and stuff. And the fact that he can sit, like any writer who can sit still and write, I think is a marvellous talent. But I can't read any of his stuff. Not the words, but the order in which they're written, like music, absolutely. And I wish I could do the same. But I don't practice enough. I'm still trying to learn the skill to communicate via video. But this is great for me because I love reading and I love reading aloud. And this is great. And by forcing myself to do this is good. And hopefully we're choosing good books to read. And I love this period as well. I think this is an interesting period because it's just out of our lifetime's reach, mostly. But it's not too far in the past and so therefore we appreciate the change. That sick feeling in the stomach was tenfold, having my eldest 4 at the time wanting to run around while on the Pont Casolti. Oh my God. Yes, I can well believe it, Julia. I can well believe it. I'm off to wash dog poo from my bike tyres. There's a job I don't relish. Reminds me of the Morecambe and Wise sketch. All the right notes, just not in the right order. How brilliant. I am loving this book, especially through the dulcet tones, Richard. Thank you endlessly. Ah, bless you. Thank you very much, Julia. You are a star. Well, that's it for today. I shall be back this evening at 8 o'clock in 5 hours' time. I'm looking forward to that on the Vogue Show. I'm going to go and make myself a cup of tea and maybe a slice of homemade bread and finish my edit for tomorrow, which should be a good one. And then I will see you later on. Take care all and look after yourself. Thanks for coming along. And I'll be back again here tomorrow at 2 o'clock to read whatever the next chapter is. So there we go. All the best. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.